Well, I know it's always strange to say, "Glory to you, Lord Christ," after such a strange reading as we just had from our lectionary today. This death of John the Baptist, which is chronicled in all four Gospels, it's a terrifying tale. It's a tale of ugliness and murder. And so it's a tough one sometimes to read. When we look at how the world was when Jesus lived, this world where John the Baptist, an innocent man, could be executed like this by Herod, this ruler who was drunk on power. Sometimes we think that our world in 2012 is so corrupt and so problematic, and there is corruption and problems in our world. Sometimes we think that it's never been as bad as it is now. But if you look back over history, we see that Jesus also lived in a time that was full of corruption and terrible things like this. We don't have a corner on the market when it comes to these things. And Jesus' world was as strange and mixed up, if not more, than the world we find ourselves in. There's a picture of this scene that was done by a Renaissance artist sometime later. And we've got this person dancing in front of Herod and then eventually asking for the head of John the Baptist. Such a strange scene, a terrifying scene, when even a young person, this young daughter of Herodias, can be drawn into the intrigue and this bloody mess that ends up with the head of John the Baptist being brought into this party. A little bit of background on Herod, and we'll go to the next slide to talk about him. This was Herod Antipas, and Herod Antipas was the son of Herod the Great. So Herod the Great was this ruler who came along about 30 years before Jesus was born. And the way it happened was this. The Romans had conquered this territory of Palestine and Judea, and they needed somebody to be sort of a puppet ruler. Well, Herod the Great appeared. He was from a well-connected family, and he said to the Romans, "Well, I'll be your ruler." And the Romans said, "Okay, well, you have some Jewish heritage, and you've got a well-connected family, so you would make a good king of this area. You just have to do everything that we tell you." And Herod said, "Well, that works for me." And the Romans said, "Well, that works for us." So all of a sudden, Herod the Great becomes this sort of puppet ruler, does everything that the Roman says, and kind of keeps control. He dies right around the time that Jesus was born, and his son, Herod Antipas, then becomes this sort of puppet king. He ruled that pink region that you see, which is Galilee, and the region where Jesus was from. So his job was to keep the Romans happy, but also to watch out for any troublemakers. If there were ever a troublemaker in the Bible, it is John the Baptist. Does anybody remember what John the Baptist wore and what he ate? Any of my young persons remember any details about John the Baptist? Anybody? What did he wear? Remember? Yeah, he wore camel skin clothes. Okay, just like a big skin that he would then tie about himself. And what did he eat? Does anybody remember what he ate? Anybody? Yeah? Locusts. What are locusts? They're bugs. They're like grasshoppers and wild honey. So John the Baptist was sort of a strange character, ate locusts and wild honey, ate grasshoppers all day, but he also spoke out, and he spoke his mind. And he said things, for example, like, "You brood of vipers in this corrupt generation." So he was most certainly a troublemaker, and Herod would have eventually wanted him out of the way. The way it happened was at this party, right? This strange party that ends up with Herodias and the daughter, and there's a lot of intrigue. You don't have to keep track of it all, but you have to keep track of the fact that this party, which would have had way too much food and way too much drink, ends up just this macabre scene in which the head of a criminal is brought into the party. Such a strange and terrifying scene. How to interpret something like this? Well, here's a trick that I think we've talked about before. When interpreting a passage from Scripture, it's really helpful to look at the passage that comes directly before it and the passage that comes directly after it. I think we've talked about this in this service before. So if you were to have your Bible open, you could see, okay, the death of John the Baptist, what happens right before it, what happens right after it. What happens right before it is that Jesus sends out the disciples, but what happens right after it is that Jesus feeds the 5,000 on the hillside. And so really neat thing that you've got Herod's party, and then exactly after the description of Herod's party, we get the description of Jesus' party. And how different are these two parties? Well, Herod's party was invite only, and the only people that were invited were the well-connected, the generals, the leaders, his political allies. Jesus' party had no invites, but about 5,000 plus people showed up, and they were the proverbial poor, tired, huddled masses, much different than the guests at Herod's party. What were the fruits of Jesus' party? Well, the fruits of Jesus' party were justice and feeding and abundance. The fruits of Herod's party was excess and debauchery. What about the way that children were treated in the two parties? Well, in Herod's party, this young girl is drawn into Herod's intrigue. In Jesus' party, children are welcomed, and it's a few chapters later that Jesus says, "Let the little children come to me," and he picks them up and he blesses them and he holds them in his arms. How different Jesus' party from Herod's party. And so the question comes to us then in our lives, which party are we going to attend? We're going to attend Herod's party for the well-connected folks and the fruits of which are intrigue and excess? Or are we going to attend Jesus' party, the fruits of which are justice and feeding and abundance? I think we want to attend Jesus' party. And I've made up some invitations. So I would like some young folks to come forward and pick up an invitation to Jesus' party. Anybody want an invitation? Come on down. You might have received an invitation to a birthday party before. And it always says on an invitation to a birthday party, who, what, where, when, why, doesn't it? So it tells you where the party is, it tells you who the party's for. So I'm going to give one of these to everyone, and then we'll talk about what it says. Okay. So it says party. It says who? You and everyone you know. It says what? Banquet of abundant life. It says where? Everywhere you go. It says when? Today. It says why? Because there's no better party. Love Jesus. We've all been invited to Jesus' party, and we have to make a choice every day. Are we going to go to Herod's party, or are we going to go to Jesus' party? Sometimes people say that life is really complicated, and it is sometimes. There are a lot of gray areas in life. But other times, life is surprisingly simple in that we're given choices between the right thing and the less right thing. Usually we don't say right thing and wrong thing, right? Because we say, well, there's the right thing and there's the less right thing. I met a doctor up in D.C. She was a professor, and her name was Dr. Sandra Wheeler. She was an ethicist. That means she studied ethics. And she was giving a talk, and she said, there are two types of ethical dilemmas. There is perplexity, we don't know what to do, and there is temptation. We know what to do, but we just can't get ourselves to do it. Perplexity and temptation. And she said, the greatest trick that humans always play in their minds is that sometimes we convince ourselves we're in a moment of perplexity, oh, I just don't know what to do, when we're actually in a moment of temptation. I know what to do, but I just can't get myself to do it. It's the same way choosing between these two parties. This is like a metaphor. You're going to go to Herod's party, you're going to go to Jesus' party. We're going to choose justice and feeding and abundance, or Herod's party of intrigue and excess. Well, I think that Christians have an opportunity to make a stand and choose to go to Jesus' party. And we Christians who are in the midst of culture, we have the opportunity, though, to say that some parts of culture we don't need to participate in. To take our stand and say, I don't have to participate in that. I don't have to be a part of that. And notice how the word participate is related to the word party. I'm not going to be party to that. I'm not going to participate in it. And the church can give guidance on that, the Bible can give guidance on that, but ultimately each one of us needs to wrestle with those decisions along with our prayers to God to decide how we're going to live and whether we're going to make the right choices day by day. Can we take a stand? There's an old hymn, hymn 686 in our hymnals, and it's called Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. You know, we have sung this at this service before. Well, it's got this really interesting first verse and then second verse. The first verse goes like this. Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Yeah, you recognize that one, right? Well, the second verse goes like this. Here I raise my Ebenezer. Ebenezer? Where did that come from? You know, actually in our Episcopal hymnal, they change it. So it says, here I find my greatest treasure. The reason they changed it is because nobody knew what an Ebenezer was anymore. And people were asking questions, is Ebenezer Scrooge? Is this a Christmas carol? Well, what the heck is an Ebenezer? Well, it turns out that it's from the Old Testament and that the prophet Samuel was in the midst of a battle. The Israelites were fighting the Philistines. And by God's miracle, the Israelites won the battle. And so what Samuel did is he took a huge rock. Imagine a big rock like Stonehenge. And he set it up on that spot. And he said, I call this rock Ebenezer. And it is a testimony to how God delivered us and how God is with us and how we have been claimed by God and how we respond to that claim. And so, the hymn writer then says, well, what if we could raise an Ebenezer? What if we could take a stand? What if we could put something in the ground, like a big, heavy stone? Not drawing a line in the sand, because a line in the sand can be washed away, but to put a rock in the ground, an Ebenezer, raise your Ebenezer, make your stand. And in this case, make your stand to say that I'm going to be at Jesus' party, and there are other things that I'm not going to be party to. What would it be like to take a stand? I've got a picture of an Ebenezer on the last slide here. To set that rock in the ground and say that God has put a claim on my life, and I am responding to that claim. And therefore, I'm going to be at Jesus' party each and every day. There's another song that came to my head as I was putting these thoughts together. You might have heard this one. It's not in our hymnal, but it's in some of the older hymnals. It goes like this. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. Let's try that.